1950, Vietnam sits at a crossroads. Having survived the French onslaught the first few years of the conflict, the Viet Minh have bought themselves some breathing room. With French morale flagging and a strong new communist neighbor to the north, perhaps the worst has now passed. Their armies are ready, and their leaders draw a deep breath because the time has finally come to shift to the offensive. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost's Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we follow the wars that wouldn't end within a Cold World War. The beginning of the digital age, the atomic age, and the space age, when we began to replicate our minds electronically, gained the power to end our very existence as a species, and discovered that we can truly reach for the stars. Last time out in Vietnam, the French were really struggling to make any inroads against the Viet Minh. A couple of larger operations went off in 1947, but failed to achieve their objectives. The Viet Minh, for their part, were happy to cede some territory without fighting, keeping their regular units shielded from a decisive battle and exercising nearly uncontested dominion over the countryside. Sounds pretty rough for the French right now, and as we step into 1950, that does not get any better for them. The victory of Red China in the Chinese Civil War makes things significantly harder because aid is now starting to pour into Vietnam, and not just a few rifles and some thoughts and prayers either. No, this is the real deal. Between April and September 1950 alone, the Chinese communists provided their Vietnamese counterparts with over 14,000 guns, 1,700 machine guns, 150 pieces of various types of cannons, not to mention communications equipment, uniforms, and medicines. More Chinese transport trucks arrived at the border in August to deliver tens of thousands of machine gun cartridges, mortars, grenades, and mines. It's not that easy, though, to deliver aid right now because of how contested the country is. With the French able to throw a wrench into delivery timetables at will, for now anyway, the key is going to be arming some Viet Minh units with enough gear so that they can hold supply routes open even if the French do make a bid to close them. Things get harder as the year goes on too, especially once Chinese leader Mao Zedong takes the decision to send troops to intervene in the Korean War in October. Maritime routes are now unsafe and out of the question. What they really need is a stable land route on good infrastructure and beyond French reach. Fortunately for the Viet Minh, that is exactly what these initial deliveries of arms and equipment are supposed to accomplish. See, throughout the first part of the year, Viet Minh commander Vau Nguyen Giáp has had some success, able to supply small offensives from the Red River Valley and bring most of northwestern Tonkin under his control. This, however, is the less hospitable and developed part of that province. And to really wrestle the province out of French hands and open up that coveted supply route, they're going to need to seize Route Coloniale 4, which runs from Cao Bang through Dong Quai all the way down to where it forks onto Route 1 at Lang Son, like 120 kilometers northeast of Hanoi. This is the section of the road that the Viet Minh want to control. Well, with rumors swirling of Chinese troops entering Korea, French now High Commissioner Léon Pignon and his new Commander-in-Chief Marcel Carpentier decide they don't want to give Mao's forces any excuse to get involved personally in Vietnam. They give the orders to retreat from Cao Bang away from the Chinese border, and that retreat goes off the first couple of days of October. Sources disagree exactly which day. This is like 2,600 troops and 500 civilians in tow. Problem is, by this point, a lot of Viet Minh troops have slipped between the French lines in preparation for their own attack in the region. So the route is full of danger. The French are supposed to be linking up with a relief force marching to meet them, but both forces are quickly brought to a standstill by ambushes, roadblocks, and blown bridges at and north of Dong Quai. The Viet Minh now surround them, and their attack begins. Bad weather prevents the French from fully flexing their muscles in the skies, and the Viet Minh make the most of the opportunity, hitting the French columns with machine guns, roadside bombs, and artillery fire, attacking from and from behind forested hills. On Carpentier's orders, the French commanders burned their trucks and supplies and abandoned the artillery pieces, then moved off the RC4 in the hope of outflanking the blocking forces. The new plan was to rendezvous at a feature called Hill 477 east of Coxa. progress was excruciatingly slow in the thick bush as scouts used machetes to hack a path through the dense growth, and many men were simply lost in the forest. The Viet Minh try to keep the pressure on, but pursuing fleeing troops through hilly jungle is not the easiest task. As morale starts to weaken, Hanoi and Giáp speaks to the troops via radio message on October 6th. "I am sure that the enemy is hungrier and colder than you. He has suffered heavier losses, and his morale has been undermined as he is a defeated invader's army. Therefore, you must put more effort into your work in order to annihilate most of the enemy troops. Rainy and foggy weather is all the more favorable to us. Forward!" The two French forces do finally link up on the 7th. This is not really the good news that they've been looking for, though, because by now, 15 Viet Minh battalions are in the area, and the 249th and 308th battalions have surrounded the French. They've also really backed themselves into a corner with their choice of rendezvous point. The route through the Coq Cha Gorge was chosen because it would bypass Dong Quai and the heavy hostile presence there. But this place is a death trap with only one real route out anyhow, unless you fancy tackling a steep 20-meter cliff while under fire, because that's your only other option. The inevitable happens, and the exhausted French troops are obliterated over the next day or so, many laying down their arms and being taken to POW camps, though only a third of those prisoners will survive to see home ever again. Actually, the French do make an attempt to get their men out of the trap, with troops from the 3rd Colonial Parachutist Battalion dropping into Tat Khe, aiming to hit the Viet Minh from the rear and opening an escape route for the besieged troops. They fail to make a meaningful difference though, and when the Viet Minh eventually turn their attention to them, they too are annihilated in turn. Only some 600 troops between the three different French forces make it back to French lines, and 4,800 in total are dead or missing. Tat Khe is quickly abandoned, followed by Lang Son, and the French reel from the defeat and set up new lines closer to Hanoi. Massive equipment stocks are left over at Lang Son in the panic, which quickly fall into Viet Minh hands, enough to supply their forces in the region for several months. The bloody business of battle done, Hanoi and Giáp rewards himself by reportedly getting drunk for the first time in his life. He is 39 years old. The battle on Route Coloniale 4 provokes a flurry of changes in organization on both sides. The Viet Minh because they can, and the French because they must. Two more casualties from that battle are Léon Pignon and Marcel Carpentier. Well, their jobs at least are casualties. They are both sacked, and General Jean de Latreille de Tassigny, who you'll no doubt remember from my World War II coverage, takes over as both High Commissioner and as Commander-in-Chief. He immediately sets about restoring the wavering morale of his forces, visiting front lines, giving speeches, meeting and reassuring the rank and file. He also takes the Machiavellian step of refusing evacuation of French women and children from the country, sending civilian transport ships back to France, and simply stating, as long as the women and children are here, the men won't dare to let go. In terms of strategy, de Tassigny unequivocally states that the French will not abandon Tonkin, and aims to free up more combat veterans for offensive operations by mobilizing French civilians in Indochina to act as garrisons and ordering the raising of further units in the state of Vietnam, the pro-French state set up under former Emperor Bao Dai that we spoke about last time. Under de Tassigny, the state of Vietnam is really little more than a puppet state, and plenty there doubt his commitment to Vietnamese independence, even if the Viet Minh can be defeated. The Viet Minh are now really starting to build up a head of steam. They're in the process of transitioning their forces into a full-fledged army, capable of fighting the French toe-to-toe. Weapons and supplies stream in from China, and Viet Minh regular forces now number just north of 160,000, many of them being first arranged into battalions, like the ones we saw earlier, then into regiments, and finally, divisions. Full divisions. European-style divisions with dedicated infantry, artillery, and anti-air subunits. Outside of the regular forces, they also have hundreds of thousands of guerrilla fighters operating across the country. The French, on the other hand, boast some 250,000 troops, but only about 40% of these are regular units, and only a fraction of those are currently in Tonkin, like some 48,000 or so. And pretty much all of them are tied down defending the urban centers and the highways from guerrilla activity. For the first time since the beginning of the war, the prospect of tackling French forces head-on is actually looking viable. Until it's very much not. De Tassigny knows what he's doing, and he is well prepared for what comes next. He's been reaching out to the United States throughout this lull in the action and asking for equipment and supplies to fight this war against communism while the Americans are fighting their own in Korea. He gets what he wants, and that aid proves to be critical in the coming battle. In January 1951, Hanoi and Giáp launches a new campaign towards Viet Minh, northwest of Hanoi and at the tip of the French defensive network. But de Tassigny's forces are dug in and well prepared, dealing Giap's troops massive casualties and a sound defeat, making the most of something new that they have gotten from the United States: napalm. Relentlessly, the napalm bombs rain down on the Viet Minh troops, literally roasting thousands of them. Early on January 17th, the 312th Division tried a final mass attack. It badly mauled a battalion under Colonel Paul Voem, but was blocked by a curtain of roaring napalm. After that, the attacks became spasmodic, then died away completely. The air grew silent. The French looked around in stunned disbelief. They had prevailed. They remained lords of the battlefield. Giap had lost 6,000 dead and 8,000 wounded and had been defeated in the open field. French air power, using a terrifying new weapon, had proved decisive. Giap makes another attempt at an offensive in the spring, targeting Maokai, but again he's turned back. The fighting continues, though Giap shifts back to less ambitious attacks, realizing the French superiority in armored vehicles and air power still makes a decisive difference. But now there are a couple of losses close to the de Tassigny household. The first comes on May 30th, when Bernard, Jean de Tassigny's only son, a soldier who accompanied him on his new posting, is killed by Viet Minh forces near Ninh Binh. Although the news shakes him to his core, de Tassigny tries to press on with his duty and does not allow himself the luxury of grief right now. But as it turns out, it's now or never, because the second casualty in the household is himself. On November 19th, he is forced to resign his post because of poor health. He leaves for Paris the following day. There, he undergoes an unsuccessful operation for what turns out to be prostate cancer. He passes away January 11, 1952. His last words are, "Where is Bernard?" Back in Vietnam, we are edging closer to a critical phase of the war. Over the course of 1952 and early 1953, things quietened down somewhat. Things aren't exactly quiet by any means, but neither side is on the verge of collapse. Broadly speaking, the French managed to prevent any large-scale Viet Minh gains and deal some heavy defeats to Giap's forces, particularly at the Battle of Nha San late in 1952. By this point, the Hanoi-Haiphong urban area is more or less encircled by Viet Minh territory. The French have no problem supplying and reinforcing their troops there, though. But what's more concerning is that the Viet Minh now have a strip of mostly uncontested territory from the Chinese border all the way down to the south of Annam province. Their numbers are still growing, and there's a real possibility they could spread out their forces along a broad front, forcing the French to do the same, then launch attacks at Hanoi, Hue, or even towards Saigon against far less concentrated and supported French defenders. Some Vietnamese regular units have been popping up down there already, in particular the 95th Regiment, fighting like guerrillas but obviously with better weapons and training, making things difficult for the French down Route 1, now known as the Street Without Joy. As well as north to south, the Viet Minh start trying to stretch the French from east to west, sending troops across the border into northern Laos in the spring of 1953. Laos is still a French protectorate at this point, and the French are bound to divert troops away from Hanoi and other major cities to protect it. The Viet Minh failed to capture the Laotian capital, Luang Prabang, outright, but they managed to occupy a smattering of territory across the north of the country, including at Sam Noea, where the Laotian communists, the Pathet Lao, set up a base of operations nearby. A couple of months later, beginning July 28th, French forces conduct an operation along Route 1 near Hue, aiming to encircle and destroy the now infamous Regiment 95. Despite massive superiority of numbers and equipment, the regiment still manages to slip away, taking almost all of its weapons and munition caches with it. Regiment 95 then, kind of predictably, returns to the area as soon as the French forces vacate. By this point, it's becoming clear to everyone on the French side, the Viet Minh cannot be fought like this. Their local intelligence is just too good. Without fail, they seem to know when the French are coming for them and exactly where to go to dodge the noose. In truth, desire to fight the Viet Minh in any kind of way has been slipping away ever since the departure and the death of de Tassigny. French forces after that point have been led by Raoul Salan, but in May 1953 he is replaced by Henri Navarre. Navarre's directives are a little different from his precursors though, and at this point France is looking for some kind of an off-ramp. They know that even a decisive victory in the field will only delay things, not going to turn them around. The Viet Minh are simply too many in number, and they boast too much support from Mao's China for a chance at a French total military victory. That time has very much passed. So, Navarre's new plan is still to try and force a decisive victory, but with the aim of giving France the strongest hand it can possibly have going into peace negotiations. Annihilating the bulk of Giap's armies in the field would go a long way towards ending the war with honor and pride satisfied. But how on earth are they going to achieve that? Pretty much every time Giap has committed his troops to a set battle, the French have smashed them. Good luck convincing him to do the same thing again now that he's handily winning. But what if the bait was good enough? What if it's something Giap just can't ignore? It would have to take place somewhere crucial to the Viet Minh's strategy, somewhere right in the middle of their area of interest, somewhere that could threaten their entire war effort if left unchecked, somewhere close enough to the French lines to be supplied and supported by air, but close enough to their enemy that they can't simply let it be. Navarre believes he has just the place in mind and sets the wheels in motion. The rest of this gambit may very well determine the conclusion of this war, and we may watch it play out before our eyes, on and around the forested hills of Dien Bien Phu. You know, that's a lot of information, that's a hell of a lot of information to pack into one episode, right? Sometimes when we do have to skim over certain things, we'll make a little bit of extra content, just talking about things in a little more depth, and one or two interesting things we might have had to leave out of the episode. Now, how can you get your hands on those videos, you ask? You can by joining the TimeGhost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. We regularly post extra little snippets of content there as part of our exclusive Project TimeGhost Insiders. The TimeGhost Army member of the week for this channel is Eric Hare, or Hare, but I think it's Hare. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.